but there was a quote by Seve that once said his greatest memory, perhaps in golf, was hugging you at Muirfield Village in 1987.
I knew you'd do that.
What a moment. What a moment. And I know how much it means to you. Absolutely, Sir Nick.
Well, I had the same for me.
When he said to me, you are a great champion, I mean, for me, God, that was one of the greatest moments of my career.
Nick Faldo called him pathetic. Gary Player said he wasn't even good enough to be a 10 handicap. And Paul Azinger flat out called him the king of gamesmanship. These are some of the greatest players in golf history, and they're all talking about the same man. Seve Ballesteros, the matador, the magician, the 5-time major champion who supposedly revolutionized the game. But if you listen closely to what the legends actually said about him, you start to realize something shocking. They didn't think Seve was great because of his swing. They thought he was great despite it. See, there's a version of Seve that everyone loves to remember. The charismatic Spaniard hitting miraculous shots from car parks and forests. But the players who actually competed against Seve, who watched him up close, who went head-to-head with him in the biggest moments, saw something completely different. They saw a player with fundamental flaws so deep that his entire career was basically a high-wire act waiting to collapse. And eventually, it did. Let's start with Gary Player. The Black Knight built his entire career on fitness, discipline, and understanding the science of the golf swing. Player didn't mince words when he talked about Seve's ball striking. He said Seve knew the least about the golf swing of anyone he'd ever seen. Player went even further. He said he played with a young Seve at Troon, and the kid wasn't even a 10 handicap in terms of understanding what he was doing. Think about that. A future 5-time major champion, and Gary Player is saying he had no clue how the golf swing actually worked. Now, Player wasn't trying to be cruel. He actually praised Seve's short game, calling it the greatest feel from 50 yards and that anyone had ever possessed. But that was the problem, according to Player. Seve was all feel, no knowledge. And Player believed that if you don't have knowledge, you're limited. You're very limited. When your swing is based purely on rhythm and timing and feel, what happens when the feel goes away? You have nothing to fall back on, no adjustments to make, no technical understanding to guide you back. Player said Seve was all over the place hitting fairways, and he believed that lack of technical foundation put a hard ceiling on how long Seve could stay at the top. When you look at how Seve's career fell apart in his mid-30s, while players like Player and Nicklaus competed deep into their 40s and remained relevant, it's hard to argue with that assessment. The numbers don't lie. Seve's prime was brilliant but brief. Nick Faldo saw the same weakness from a different angle. Faldo famously tore down his entire golf swing and rebuilt it from scratch with David Ledbetter. He turned himself into a machine that could repeat the same motion under any pressure. Faldo looked at golf as biomechanical levers that needed to work in perfect harmony. And when he looked at Seve, he saw chaos. Instead of using body rotation to square the club face at impact, Seve relied almost entirely on his hands. He was manipulating the club with hand-eye coordination, timing everything at the last possible millisecond. That's mentally exhausting. Faldo believed in having what he called a stock shot, a reliable and repeatable ball flight that you could count on when the pressure was at its highest. Seve didn't have that. Every shot was a new adventure, a new manipulation, a new act of creation. And sure, when it worked, it was beautiful. It was breathtaking. But Faldo's point was that it didn't work often enough. Those legendary recovery shots that everyone remembers? Faldo and others pointed out that Seve only needed to hit those shots because his tee shots put him in trouble in the first place. Lanny Wadkins said it perfectly. He erased a lot of mistakes with his short game, but it don't last but so long. Faldo built his swing to last, to hold up on Sunday at a major when your hands are shaking and your mind is racing. Seve's swing required miracles, and you can't schedule miracles. Before we go further, just make sure you're subscribed to this channel. We're diving deep into the untold stories and controversial truths about golf's greatest legends, and you don't want to miss what's coming next. Drop a comment below telling us which golf legend we should cover next. Now, back to the destruction of Seve's game. Lee Trevino understood Seve's mechanical problems better than almost anyone because Trevino himself played with an unconventional swing, but even Trevino saw the fatal flaw. Seve hit a violent hook. His ball would curve so dramatically from right to left that he often had to aim almost 45 degrees to the right of his target just to compensate. Trevino famously said you can talk to a fade, but a hook won't listen. A hook requires the club face to be closed relative to the swing path at impact, and that timing thrives on youth and confidence but collapses under stress and age. Trevino called Seve the best trouble shot player who ever lived. It didn't matter how far in the woods you put that guy, he'd find a way out. But here's the thing. Trevino also said that Seve inadvertently put a lot of big numbers on the scorecards of average players because he inspired them to take dumb chances. That phrase, dumb chances, is key. Seve's game was built on converting low probability shots. Shots that shouldn't work, but somehow did. That's not sustainable. That's not a formula for longevity. A smart game, a winning game over the long term, avoids trouble in the first place. Trevino's critique was strategic. Seve played a gambler's game and eventually, every gambler loses. Trevino even broke down Seve's bunker technique, which was completely different from anyone else. Seve told players to ride the pony. He'd set up with his feet at a 45-degree angle, squat down low, drop his hands way down, and then just straighten his right leg through impact. Most players keep their hands high in bunkers to use the bounce. Seve did the opposite. Pure hands, minimal body. It was genius when it worked, but fragile. It couldn't be taught, and it couldn't be maintained once age slowed those hands. Now, if the technical critics focused on Seve's inability to hit the ball straight, the ethical critics focused on his inability to play the game straight. To a lot of the American players, Seve's passion was just a cover for something uglier. Gamesmanship, psychological warfare, rule bending that crossed the line into manipulation. And the player who hated this the most was Paul Azinger. Azinger called Seve the king of gamesmanship, and he didn't mean it as a compliment. Their feud reached its peak at the 1991 Ryder Cup at Kiowa Island. In the opening match, Azinger and Chip Beck faced Seve and Jose Maria Olazabal. Chip Beck later claimed that Seve's constant coughing bothered him during his shots. Azinger seized on this, publicly labeling Seve as someone who resorted to cheap tricks. To Azinger, a player using distraction was admitting he couldn't win on merit. Seve fired back saying the Americans were 11 nice guys and Paul Azinger. Then there was the ball compression incident in that same match. Seve noticed that Chip Beck had switched from a 100 compression ball to a 90 compression ball during the round, which violated the one-ball rule. But here's the thing. Seve didn't call the penalty right away. He waited. He let the Americans keep playing, building false confidence, only alerting the European captain at the turn to maximize the psychological disruption and swing momentum. It was calculated. It was cold. Azinger was furious. They'd made a mistake, sure, but they weren't trying to cheat. Seve's response was chilling. He said it has nothing to do with cheating. Cheating and breaking the rules are two different things. That distinction between the spirit of the game and the letter of the law is where Azinger found Seve's weakness. To Azinger, Seve was a lawyer on the golf course, looking for loopholes instead of fairways. Their animosity went back to the 1989 Ryder Cup at the Belfry. During a singles match, Azinger refused Seve's request to replace a scuff ball. Later, when Azinger hit a ball into the water and got a drop, Seve disputed it. But the defining moment came when Seve found himself in deep trouble in the trees. Azinger, seeing Seve hemmed in by a wall and pine trees, pleaded with him, "I know you're Seve Ballesteros, but you're not Paul Daniels. Chip it out, will you please?" Paul Daniels was a famous magician in Britain. Azinger was saying, "You're not a magician." Seve refused. He slashed at the ball. Azinger saw dust fly up, watched the ball go over the wall, through a tiny gap in the trees, and land 1 yard off the green. Azinger fell to his knees in mock worship, but underneath there was genuine frustration. Azinger viewed Seve's game as an illusion. Hale Irwin had his own issues with Seve. Irwin was a 3-time U.S. Open champion, known for his precision and intellect. He viewed Seve's chaotic style as an insult to the dignity of the sport. Their tension started at the 1979 Open Championship at Royal Lytham. On the 16th hole, Seve drove his ball into a temporary car park. From that absurd position, he got a free drop, pitched onto the green, and made birdie to win the tournament. The phrase parking lot champion started getting thrown around. Seve was convinced Irwin coined the term to delegitimize his victory. Irwin never confirmed he started it, but he didn't disagree with it either. He said, "One shot into a car park resulting in being called parking lot champion? I think that's more of a derogatory term." To Irwin, a real champion doesn't hit the ball into car parks. The fact that Seve could win doing that wasn't a testament to brilliance. It was proof that the sport sometimes rewards chaos instead of punishing it. Irwin's distaste for Seve started even earlier. At the 1976 World Match Play, Irwin complained that Seve was repairing spike marks on the greens throughout their match. The rules allowed repairing pitch marks, but not spike marks. Seve claimed they were pitch marks. Irwin saw a young player testing the boundaries of integrity. To Irwin, that was a character weakness. Lanny Wadkins took a different approach to Seve. Instead of being offended like Azinger or dismissive like Irwin, Wadkins was motivated by Seve's antics, and he used that motivation to dominate him. At the 1983 Ryder Cup, during a critical singles match, the atmosphere was brutal. Seve, feeling the pressure, accused Wadkins of deliberately aiming a putt at Seve's coin marker on the green to prove a point or intimidate him. Wadkins' response became legendary. "That's right, Seve. I'm that effing good." That interaction revealed something crucial about Seve: paranoia, a weakness where he believed everyone was conspiring against him. Wadkins exploited that, finishing his career with a 4-0 record against the Spaniard. Going into the 1993 Ryder Cup, media reports described Wadkins as a lamb who'd be turned into chopped liver by the Europeans. Wadkins used that as fuel. He viewed Seve's team as black sheep who thought they were untouchable. By consistently beating Seve, Wadkins proved that the Spanish magic crumbled when faced with a player who refused to be intimidated. Beyond the swing mechanics and the gamesmanship, there were questions about Seve's professionalism, his discipline, his ability to show up when it mattered most. Tom Lehman witnessed this at the 1995 Ryder Cup at Oak Hill. By this point, Seve was physically falling apart. His back was betraying him. His swing was gone. Sports writers called his game a horror movie. Lehman faced Seve in singles and confirmed how bad it had gotten. Seve didn't hit a single fairway on the front nine. Not one. 0 out of 9 fairways. Think about that. Lehman described it as the best 9 holes of golf he'd ever seen, but only because of the recovery shots. The scrambling was super superhuman. He said if you put him where Seve was hitting his second shots from and he played against himself, he would have won 10 and 8. Then there was the hypocrisy issue. At the 1999 Ryder Cup at Brookline, the American team celebrated prematurely on the 17th green before Jose Maria Olazabal had finished putting. The celebration was wild, chaotic, disrespectful to some. Seve, who was a vice captain by then, was furious. He called the behavior disgusting and shameful. Tom Lehman, who was part of the celebration, found that rich coming from the king of gamesmanship. Lehman shot back, saying the last thing the tour needs is a bunch of greedy, whiny brats. Though that comment was about a pay dispute, it reflected the deep resentment Americans felt. Seve spent years policing their behavior while engaging in coughing, ball switching, and aggressive rule lawyering. To Lehman, Seve's weakness was his inability to take what he dished out. Perhaps the most damning professional failure came at the 1980 U.S. Open at Baltusrol. Seve, the reigning Masters and Open champion, arrived at the tee 7 minutes late for his second round. 7 minutes. He claimed he was weak with the flu and had misread his tee time. His playing partners, Hale Irwin and Mark O'Mara, had already hit their second shots. The rules of golf were clear and unforgiving. If he'd arrived before they hit their second shots, it would have been a 2-stroke penalty. Because they'd already played, it was disqualification. Rumors swirled that Irwin hurried his second shot to ensure Seve was disqualified. True or not, it showed the lack of goodwill Seve had built with his peers. More importantly, it highlighted a chaotic amateurism in his preparation. His brother Baldomero was caddying and responsible for keeping track of tee times. Jack Nicklaus, who won that tournament, would never have missed a tee time. To the legends, this was a disqualifying weakness of professionalism. All of these critiques, the mechanical flaws, the ethical questions, the temperamental issues, they all converged in the collapse of Seve's game. The moment many point to is the 1986 Masters. Seve was leading on the 15th hole, a par 5. He had a 4-iron into the green. A solid shot would likely seal the victory and give him a third green jacket. Instead, he hit what witnesses described as a fat toe hook that line-drived into the pond. It was a mechanical failure under maximum pressure. Lanny Wadkins said Seve was never quite the same after that shot. It confirmed Gary Player's thesis. Without knowledge of the swing, without technical fundamentals to rely on, pressure exposes everything. Seve lost to Jack Nicklaus that day, and something broke inside him. As Seve entered the 1990s, the technical flaw that Nick Faldo had identified became impossible to ignore or compensate for. His back began to fail, a result of the violent reverse C action he used to generate power. He became what one writer called clueless, missing fairways by 50 yards, relying entirely on a short game that could no longer save him from the penalties. By the time he played Lehman in 1995, he was a figure of sympathy rather than fear. The weakness had consumed the genius. Even today, modern players who grew up idolizing Seve understand the conflict at the heart of his legacy. Paul Casey revered Seve enough to purchase the Spaniard's Rolex watch at auction. He loved the flair, the flamboyancy it represented, but when Casey stood on the 16th tee at Lytham years later, looking at the spot where Seve hit that famous car park shot, he said there are no cars now, but I would have carved one around them anyway. Casey acknowledged that his emotional attachment was to Seve, but his actual game is closer to Faldo's. The modern tour demands consistency. Seve's high-variance style has been bred out of the professional game. Lee Trevino's final verdict might be the most insightful. Seve was a troubleshot genius, but he inspired a generation to take dumb chances. The legacy of Seve's weakness lives on in amateurs who try to hit impossible shots through trees because they saw Seve do it, not realizing that Seve only had to hit those shots because he'd already failed to hit the fairway. So what was Seve Ballesteros' real weakness? According to the legends who competed against him, it was this. His entire game was a house of cards built on the precarious foundation of feel and psychological warfare. For one brilliant, glorious decade, the cards held. He built a monument to human creativity and willpower. He showed that golf could be more than mechanics and mathematics. It could be art. It could be magic. But as Gary Player, Nick Faldo, Lee Trevino, Paul Azinger, Hale Irwin, Tom Lehman, and Lanny Wadkins all predicted in their own ways, without a foundation of knowledge, without structural mechanics, without professional discipline, gravity eventually wins. Seve didn't lose his talent. He simply ran out of the miracles required to sustain his weaknesses. And maybe that's what makes his story so powerful. He showed us that genius can overcome fundamental flaws, but only for so long. He taught us that passion and creativity and heart can carry you to heights that textbook technique never could. But he also taught us, through his decline and his struggles, that there's no escaping the fundamentals forever. The legends saw his weaknesses clearly. They pointed them out, they exploited them, and they watched them eventually consume him. But even knowing all of that, even understanding every flaw and limitation, they still couldn't help but respect what he achieved in spite of it all. Because Seve Ballesteros didn't just play golf, he defied it. And for a few magical years, he made the impossible look routine. That's the legacy. Not perfection, but the beautiful, tragic proof that imperfection, when paired with enough heart, can still change the world. If this deep dive into golf's most controversial truths resonated with you, hit that subscribe button and let us know in the comments which legend's untold story we we should investigate next, because the history of golf is filled with myths that deserve to be examined, and we're just getting started.